The birthday cake hit the wall with enough force to leave a dent in the drywall. Buttercream frosting dripped down like evidence of something that had been sweet turning violently sour. My daughter Emily stood there, her hand still raised from the throw, while her husband Brandon put his arm around her shoulders like he was comforting a victim instead of enabling an assault. "Dad's clearly not himself," Brandon said, his voice dripping with manufactured concern. "This kind of paranoia. These accusations. Emily, I think we need to consider what we talked about. I was 68 years old. I'd been a high school principal for 30 years. I'd dealt with manipulative teenagers, concerned parents, and budget meetings with superintendents who could smell weakness like sharks smell blood and water. And standing in my kitchen on my birthday, watching my son-in-law play his hand, I knew exactly what game he was running. The problem was, my daughter didn't. 3 months earlier, things had seemed normal enough. Emily and Brandon had been married for 2 years. He was charming, attentive to her, and had that easy confidence that came from private schools and trust funds. Or at least, that's what I'd thought. What I didn't know then was that the trust fund was empty and the confidence was just practice. It started small, a comment here and there. "Dad, you told us you'd meet us at the restaurant on Tuesday, remember? When I'd said no such thing. You called me Jessica yesterday when Emily's name had never left my lips incorrectly in her entire life. Each time, said with love and concern, like they were gently pointing out something for my own good. At first, I'd questioned myself. Maybe I was getting forgetful. 68 wasn't ancient, but it wasn't young either. My wife Margaret had passed 3 years ago, and sometimes the house felt too quiet, like my memory had too much empty space to fill. But then I'd check my calendar, look at my text messages, verify my own sanity against documentation, the way I'd taught myself to do during decades of dealing with parents who swore their child would never cheat, despite the identical essays. The discrepancies were always theirs, never mine. The first real alarm bell came when I walked into my living room and found Brandon measuring the windows. He had a tape measure extended, muttering numbers to himself, and when he saw me, his expression flickered for just a second. Guilt, maybe, or calculation. "Hey, Frank." Too loud, too cheerful. "Emily mentioned you were thinking about new curtains. Thought I'd help out, get some measurements for you." I'd mentioned no such thing. "That's thoughtful," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "But I'm happy with the curtains I have." Of course, of course." He wound up the tape measure with quick, practiced movements. "Just trying to help. You know how Emily worries about you being here all alone." After he left, I checked every room in my house. He'd measured the living room, the master bedroom, and the kitchen. The kind of measurements you'd take if you were staging a house for sale. That night, I stood in my study, looking at the built-in shelves my father had constructed when I was 10 years old. This house had been in my family for 43 years. Margaret and I had raised both our kids here. David, our oldest, had learned to walk in that hallway. Emily had hidden behind that couch during thunderstorms, and someone was measuring it like inventory. I did what any former principal would do. I started documenting everything. I bought a small digital recorder, the kind used for lectures and interviews. Oregon is a one-party consent state, which meant I could legally record any conversation I was part of. I kept a detailed journal, noting dates, times, and exact quotes. Every interaction, every concerned comment, every piece of gaslighting went into my records. The pattern became clear within 2 weeks. Brandon would say things like, "Remember last week when you forgot to lock the front door?" Emily found it wide open at 10 p.m. I'd checked my notes. The door had been locked. I'd tested it twice that night because I'd started testing everything twice. Or, "You seemed really confused at dinner on Sunday. You asked Emily the same question 3 times. I had my recorder in my pocket at that dinner. I'd played it back. I'd asked the question once. The gaslighting was methodical, consistent, and it was working on Emily. I could see it in how she looked at me now, with worry creasing her forehead, with that careful tone people use around the elderly they think might be fragile. My son David called every week from Seattle. He was a software engineer, making good money, but anchored to his job and his own family. When I mentioned my concerns about Brandon, he was supportive, but distant. "Dad, you want me to come down? I can take a week off." No, son. I'm handling it. Just needed to talk it through. Emily mentioned she's worried about you. Says you've been forgetting things. There it was. The poison spreading through my family tree. David, I want you to do me a favor. Don't just take anyone's word for how I'm doing. If you're concerned, come see for yourself. Talk to me directly. Can you promise me that? A pause. Then, of course, Dad. Always. The escalation came during what was supposed to be a casual Sunday dinner. Emily had invited me to their place, a nice condo in the Pearl District that I'd helped with the down payment for. They'd invited another couple, the Hendersons, who I'd met briefly at the wedding. Except Mark Henderson wasn't just a friend. He was a real estate agent. I watched him through dinner, the way his eyes kept moving around my daughter's home, the professional assessment happening behind the friendly conversation. When Brandon mentioned, casually, that they were thinking about upgrading to a house with more space, Mark's interest sharpened. The market's really good right now for sellers, Mark said, accepting another glass of wine from Emily, especially for family properties with character. Those Victorian houses near Hawthorne, for instance. They're going for $600,000-700,000 easy. My house was a Victorian near Hawthorne. Dad's place is beautiful, Emily said, and I heard the past tense in it even though she probably didn't. He's been there forever. Must be hard. Maintaining a place that size alone, Mark continued, smooth as glass. A lot of my clients downsize after they retire. Condos are great. Less maintenance, more security, communities built in. Brandon jumped in like they'd rehearsed it. We've actually been talking about that. Frank, you remember, right? About maybe looking at some senior living options? Just to explore. I did not remember, because it had never happened. Emily was nodding, though. You seemed really interested when we mentioned the Bridgeport community. They have activities, Dad. Social opportunities. You've been isolated since Mom passed. I set down my fork carefully. I don't recall that conversation. See? Brandon's voice was so gentle it made my teeth hurt. This is exactly what we're worried about, Frank. These gaps. It's nothing to be ashamed of. Mark Henderson looked uncomfortable suddenly, like he was realizing he'd walked into family drama instead of a sales opportunity. Good. Let him squirm. I think, I said clearly, that I'd remember a conversation about selling my home. The home where I raised my children, where my wife died, where 43 years of my life are stored in every room. Dad. Emily reached across the table for my hand. We just want you safe. I let her hold my hand, looked her in the eyes, and said, I am safe. What I'm not is forgetful. The dinner ended early. That week, I made an appointment with Dr. Sarah Chen, my physician of 15 years. I explained what was happening. Her face went through several expressions, ending on anger. You want a cognitive evaluation, complete battery, everything. I want documentation that my mind is sound. She scheduled it for the following week. The Montreal Cognitive Assessment, the mini mental state examination, even some memory tests that went beyond the standard screening. I scored perfectly on everything. Dr. Chen wrote it all up in detail, noting my excellent cognitive function, my intact memory, and her professional opinion that I showed no signs of dementia, Alzheimer's, or any other cognitive decline. Frank, she said, handing me the report, what's really going on here? I told her. She listened, and when I finished, she wrote something else on her prescription pad and handed it to me. It was a name and number. Gerald Voss, elder law attorney. Call him. Today. Gerald Voss had an office in a renovated house in Nob Hill, the kind of place that felt more like someone's study than a law firm. He was younger than I expected, maybe 50, with the kind of sharp attention that reminded me of the best teachers I'd hired over the years. I played him selected recordings, showed him my documentation, explained the pattern. He didn't interrupt once. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. Mr. Fletcher, you're describing financial elder abuse. Specifically, what looks like an attempt to establish grounds for guardianship. The word hung in the air like smoke from a gun. Guardianship, he continued, requires proving that you're incapable of managing your own affairs. Your son-in-law appears to be creating a false narrative of cognitive decline. The measurements, the realtor, these are consistent with someone planning to take control of your assets. My daughter doesn't know. Are you certain? I thought about Emily's face, the genuine worry, the love mixed with fear. She thinks she's helping me. She thinks I'm deteriorating, and too proud to admit it. That's common. The abuser isolates the victim by turning family members into unwitting accomplices. He pulled out a legal pad. Have you noticed any financial irregularities? Attempts to access your accounts? Not yet, but I have everything locked down tight. Power of attorney goes to David, and it's very specific about requiring medical documentation from multiple independent physicians. Smart. But that won't stop someone determined. If your son-in-law can get you declared incompetent, he can petition for guardianship. Once he has that, your power of attorney becomes irrelevant. The weight of it settled on my shoulders. What do I do? You keep documenting everything. You don't confront him directly. And you prepare for the probability that he's going to escalate. Gerald pulled out a business card. This is a colleague who specializes in security systems. I want you to get cameras installed. Audio and video, covering your common areas. Legal in your own home, and invaluable evidence. I left his office with a plan and a cold certainty that this was going to get worse before it got better. The cameras went in 3 days later. Small, discreet, professional grade, living room, kitchen, entryway, and the hallway outside my bedroom. The technician, a woman named Janice who'd done work for Gerald before, showed me how to access the feeds from my phone. A lot of our clients are protecting themselves from family, she said quietly. It's more common than people think. Adult children who see inheritance as something they're owed now, not later. Brandon's not my son. No, but he married your daughter. Close enough to your assets to be dangerous. 2 weeks later, Brandon brought a doctor to my house. I was in my garden, cutting back the roses Margaret had planted, when I heard the doorbell. Through the front window, I could see Brandon's car in the driveway, and 2 figures standing on my porch. I didn't rush. Let them wait. When I opened the door, Brandon had his concerned face on. Next to him stood a man in his 50s, wearing a polo shirt and khakis, carrying a leather portfolio. Frank, sorry to drop by unannounced. This is Dr. Richard Paulson. He's a friend of mine, and I mentioned some of our concerns. He was kind enough to offer to stop by, just for a casual chat. Doctor, Paulson extended his hand. His grip was soft, his smile professional. Mr. Fletcher, I specialize in geriatric care. Brandon mentioned you've been experiencing some memory issues. I thought I could offer some guidance, completely informal. The recorder in my pocket was already running. I'd started keeping it on anytime someone came to the house. How thoughtful, I said. Please, come in. I led them to the living room, offered coffee, played the gracious host. All the while, the cameras were recording every angle, every word, every manipulation about to unfold. Dr. Paulson settled into Margaret's favorite chair, which felt like a violation all by itself. So, Brandon tells me you've had some trouble with short-term memory. Forgetting conversations, misplacing things. It's very common at your age. Nothing to be alarmed about. I haven't had any trouble with my memory. A glance between them, so quick most people would miss it. Well, that's actually part of the condition, Paulson continued smoothly. Anosognosia. When cognitive decline prevents someone from recognizing their own decline. It's a protective mechanism. Really. I'm familiar with the term. I had several teachers over the years who developed dementia. I watched the progression. Then you understand how insidious it can be. He pulled some papers from his portfolio. I've prepared some simple screening questions, just to establish a baseline. Would you be willing? I've already been screened. By my actual doctor, Dr. Sarah Chen. I can provide you with the results if you'd like. Brandon leaned forward. Dad, Dr. Paulson is doing us a favor here. Can you just cooperate? I am cooperating. I'm telling you, I've already had a complete cognitive evaluation. I scored perfectly. No signs of any decline whatsoever. Paulson's smile stiffened slightly. Well, sometimes family physicians don't catch the subtle signs. As a specialist, what hospital are you affiliated with, Dr. Paulson? Silence. He recovered quickly. I'm in private practice. Consultative work, mainly. And your license number? I'd like to verify your credentials. Just due diligence, you understand. Brandon stood up. This is exactly what we're talking about. This paranoia. Dad, we're trying to help you. By bringing a stranger to my house to declare me incompetent? I kept my voice level, conversational. That seems like an odd kind of help. See? Brandon turned to Paulson like I wasn't there. The defensiveness, the hostility toward people trying to assist. I stood up too. Gentlemen, I appreciate you stopping by, but I'm not interested in whatever evaluation you're offering. I have my own physicians, my own legal counsel, and my own faculties, all of which are sound. Paulson gathered his papers, and something in his expression shifted. The friendly doctor act dropped, just for a moment, and I saw a calculation underneath. Mr. Fletcher, I should tell you that refusal to cooperate with medical evaluation can be documented as evidence of impaired judgment. Document whatever you'd like, but do it from outside my home. I'd like you both to leave now. After they left, I sat in my living room and played back the recording. Then I emailed it to Gerald, along with the video files from the cameras. He called me within an hour. Frank, this is it. This is attempted fraud. That man isn't a licensed physician in Oregon. I checked. He's a wellness consultant who lost his medical license in California 3 years ago for Medicare fraud. The pieces were falling into place like evidence at trial. What's the next move? He's going to try to use this visit as evidence that you're uncooperative and paranoid. He'll write up something official-looking, and Brandon will use it to petition for emergency guardianship. We need to beat him to the punch. Gerald's voice was sharp now, tactical. I'm filing a protective order. No contact regarding your medical care, your finances, or your living situation. Any attempts to circumvent your autonomy will be documented as abuse. That'll destroy my relationship with Emily. Frank, what relationship? She's already participating in gaslighting you. I'm sorry, but your daughter is being used as a weapon against you. I looked around my empty house. Margaret's books still on the shelves. Emily's school photos on the mantle. The life I'd built, brick by brick. Being dismantled by a con artist who'd married into my family. File the order, I said. The confrontation came on my birthday. Emily had insisted on dinner at my house. Dad, please, it's your birthday. Let me cook for you. Let us celebrate you. How could I say no? She was still my daughter under all of this. She arrived at 5 with groceries and Brandon. He was quieter than usual, watching me with a new kind of assessment. They knew about the protective order. Gerald had served it 2 days earlier. Emily cooked Margaret's pot roast recipe while Brandon set the table. The domesticity of it felt surreal, like we were actors in a play pretending everything was normal. We made it through appetizers and small talk. Then, during the main course, Brandon cleared his throat. Frank, we need to talk about the legal action you've taken. What action would that be? The restraining order. Against me. Your own family. He said it with perfect, wounded dignity. It's a protective order preventing you from interfering with my medical care or financial decisions. Hardly a restraining order. Emily set down her fork. Dad, why would you do that? We're trying to help you. Are you? I looked at my daughter, really looked at her. Emily, do you remember 3 weeks ago when you told me I'd left the stove on and nearly started a fire? She nodded, her face already defensive. I need you to think very carefully. Did you actually see the stove on? Or did Brandon tell you I'd left it on? Her mouth opened, closed. I watched her scroll back through memory. Brandon called me at work. He said he'd stop by and found it on. I wasn't home that day. I was at my dental appointment. Dr. Morrison can verify. The stove was never on. Brandon interrupted. You're confusing your timeline. I'm not. I pulled out my phone, brought up my calendar. Here's the appointment confirmation. Here's the receipt from the dental office. Time stamped at 1:15 p.m., the same time you claimed to be in my house finding the stove on. I looked at him. Except you couldn't have been here, because I have security cameras now, and they show no one entered my house that entire day. Emily's face went pale. What are you saying? I'm saying your husband has been systematically lying to you about my cognitive state, creating false incidents, gaslighting both of us. That's insane, Brandon started. Is it? I pulled out my recorder, set it on the table. I've been documenting everything for 3 months. Every false claim, every manufactured emergency. Your fake doctor friend who lost his medical license. Your measurements of my house, while pretending to help with curtains. The real estate agent you brought to dinner to assess my property value. Brandon's expression transformed. The concern melted away, leaving something colder underneath. You recorded us? That's illegal. One-party consent state. Completely legal. I'm part of every conversation on those recordings. I turned to Emily. Sweetheart, I need you to hear these. I need you to hear what's been happening. Don't listen to him. Brandon reached for Emily's hand. He's paranoid. This is exactly what Dr. Paulson warned us about. Dr. Paulson isn't a doctor, I said quietly. He lost his license for fraud, Gerald checked. Emily pulled her hand away from Brandon. What? I pressed play on the recorder. The audio from the casual evaluation filled the room. Paulson's voice, smooth and professional, asking questions designed to make me look incompetent. Brandon's voice, backing him up, creating a narrative of decline. Then I played the recording from the dinner with Mark Henderson. Brandon's carefully casual mention of upgrading, the discussion of my house's value, the planning happening in real time. Emily's expression moved through shock, confusion, and then something harder, betrayal. Brandon, what is this? He stood up fast enough to knock his chair back. It's your father trying to turn you against me. He's sick, Em. He needs help. This paranoia. I pulled up the camera footage on my phone. This is from the day you claimed I left the stove on. Watch the timestamp. No one enters or exits my house all day. Cameras? Brandon's voice rose. You've been spying. In my own home, protecting my own property, my own life. Emily was crying now, quiet tears running down her face as she watched the footage. I showed her more. Brandon, measuring rooms. Brandon talking on his phone in my driveway after I'd refused the fake evaluation, and I'd had the external camera catch the audio. She's on board. Just need to push Frank a little more. Once we get guardianship, the house sells, and we clear $500,000 easy. Your debt's covered. Emily stood up, swaying slightly. You were going to... my dad's house. You were going to... Baby, it's not what it sounds like. Get out. Her voice was so quiet I barely heard it. Emily, let me explain. Get out. Louder now, and she was looking at him with an expression I'd never seen on her face. Pure rage. Out of my dad's house. Out of my life. Get out. Brandon looked at me, and in that moment, I saw him make a decision. He grabbed the birthday cake Emily had made, and with a theatrical fury that would have been impressive in other circumstances, he hurled it at the wall behind me. You've poisoned her against me, you selfish old bastard. We were trying to help you, and you've destroyed our marriage. The cake hit with a wet splat, buttercream splattering across the wallpaper Margaret had hung 20 years ago. I stood up calmly, pulled out my phone, and sent a single text to Gerald. Now. Brandon was still ranting. Emily was sobbing, and the doorbell rang. Gerald Voss stood on my porch with a process server and 2 officers from the Portland Police Department. I'd called in a favor through Dr. Chen, who'd contacted Adult Protective Services. They'd been building a case based on my documentation. The next hour was a blur of statements, evidence presentation, and Brandon's increasingly desperate attempts to spin the narrative. But the recordings didn't lie. The camera footage didn't lie. The fake doctor's fraudulent credentials didn't lie. The officers left with Brandon in handcuffs, not for assault with a cake, though that probably didn't help his case, for attempted financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. Gerald had filed charges based on everything we'd documented. Emily and I stood in my kitchen, looking at the cake-splattered wall. I'm so sorry, Dad. You didn't know. I should have known. I should have questioned it. I should have trusted you. She was crying harder now. He was in my ear constantly, showing me articles about dementia and Alzheimer's, making me doubt you. making me think I needed to save you from yourself. I put my arms around my daughter, and she sobbed into my shoulder like she was 10 years old again. He exploited your love, I said quietly. That's what abusers do. They find the love, and they weaponize it. Over the next week, the full scope of Brandon's debts came out. $200,000 in gambling losses. A failed startup he'd never told Emily about. Creditors circling. He'd married my daughter for access to family money. And when that wasn't enough, he'd decided to go for the real prize. My house. Emily moved back home for a few months while she filed for divorce and processed everything. We spent a lot of time in the garden, not talking, just being together. She'd lost trust in her own judgment. That would take time to rebuild. David flew down from Seattle. He was furious with himself for not seeing it, for not questioning the narrative when Emily had told him about my supposed decline. I should have come sooner, should have verified. I told you to trust your own assessment. You would have, if it had been necessary. I was handling it. Yeah, with security cameras and hidden recorders. Jesus, Dad. You went full spy. I went full principal, I corrected. Documentation, evidence. Never fight a battle without proof. The investigation into Dr. Richard Paulson revealed he'd been running this scam in 3 states, using his fake credentials to help family members establish guardianship over elderly relatives, collecting fees for his evaluations, and moving on before anyone caught up with him. My case brought down a network. Brandon took a plea deal, probation, restitution, and a permanent flag in the elder abuse registry. The divorce went through quickly once Emily's lawyer laid out the evidence of financial fraud. My birthday came around again, a year later. This time, Emily cooked dinner at her new apartment, a modest place in Selwood she was genuinely proud of. David flew down with his family, and I invited Rosa Martinez, my neighbor who'd been keeping an eye on my house whenever I traveled. Rosa was an immigrant from El Salvador. I'd helped her practice English for her citizenship test 2 years ago. We'd bonded over Margaret's rose garden, which she'd helped me maintain after Margaret died. When the whole situation with Brandon had been happening, Rosa had been the one who noticed things. Strange cars in my driveway. Brandon taking measurements through windows. I didn't know if I should say something, she told me later. Sometimes people don't want to hear suspicions about family. Always say something, I'd told her. Always. Now, we sat around Emily's table, and she proposed a toast. To Dad, for being smarter than all of us, for protecting himself, and for teaching us that love without boundaries is just vulnerability waiting to be exploited. We drank to that. Later, after everyone left and I was driving home through Portland's quiet streets, I thought about Margaret. About how she'd always said my principal instincts served me well outside the school too. Document everything. Verify claims. Don't accept second-hand information when you can confirm it yourself. Those instincts had saved my house, my autonomy, and possibly my life. The wallpaper where the cake had hit was repaired now. You couldn't see the stain anymore. Some things could be fixed. Some things could be made whole again. I pulled into my driveway, and before I got out of the car, I sat for a moment in the darkness. My house was still mine. My mind was still mine. My choices were still mine. At 68, I'd learned that the greatest act of love you can show your children isn't to let them take care of you. It's to teach them that taking care of yourself, protecting yourself, and refusing to be a victim aren't selfish acts. They're survival. I checked the locks twice before bed, the way I always did now. Not out of paranoia, but out of practice. The cameras were still there, still recording. I'd keep them. Gerald had suggested it, and I agreed. You never know, he'd said, when documentation will save your life. He was right. Some people might call it cynical, keeping surveillance in your own home, recording conversations with family. But those people haven't watched someone they love be turned into a weapon against them, haven't seen the systematic dismantling of trust for profit. I called it wisdom. That night, I slept soundly in the house my father built, in the room where Margaret and I had shared 41 years of marriage, surrounded by the life I'd chosen and protected. And in the morning, I'd tend the roses, check in with Rosa, and maybe call Emily to see how she was doing. Because that's what you do when you've survived. You keep living, you keep loving, you just do it with your eyes open and your evidence documented. The best revenge, I'd learned, isn't revenge at all. It's protecting your peace and living long enough to enjoy it.